Hi, this is Kyle Brown with Claw Hammer Supply, and in this video I'm going to talk about the assembly of the Mighty Pint, our mini whiskey barrel. The first step is preparation, actually, but before we talk about the prep work that needs to be done, I am going to strongly suggest that you watch this entire video before beginning assembly. Okay, so let's just go ahead and verify all of our parts here before we do anything. We have 2 clamps, 2 corks, 14 staves, 1 venting stave, a total of 15 staves, an end cap with a hole and an end cap without a hole. Before doing any building, what you're going to want to do is take a piece of sandpaper. I'm using 100 grit here, and you're just going to take the edges off of the end caps. Just put an ever so slight bevel on those end caps. You're going to want to do both sides of each cap. And once you are finished with that, we can move on to the build process. So the first step here is to roll out a piece of masking tape, preferably about 12 inches long. And you're going to use this to secure the staves for attachment to the end caps. And you're going to want to be pretty careful when you lay these staves out, because the sturdier you get them during this part of the process, the easier it is going to be to line them with the end caps. And the best way to do this is to use some sort of a straight edge as a guide. I would suggest actually using the stave with the venting stave, basically the stave with the hole in it, as a guide for lining up the rest of the stave. So basically just put that venting stave at the bottom there and then line the rest of the staves up, and then at the very end put the venting stave there. Now what I'm showing you here in this next part is that you're going to want to make sure that the end cap with basically the fill cap, or the hole on the fill cap, lines up in the middle of this stave assembly, which means that once the barrel is fully assembled, as you'll see at the end of the process, the hole on the fill cap and the hole in the venting stave are on opposite sides of the barrel. This will allow you to pour liquid out of the hole on the fill cap without it also coming out of the hole in the venting stave. Just take my word for it. That's what you're going to want to do. Alright, so the next step here is to align the caps so that the flat part of the caps line up with the back, basically the groove, the slot in the staves. And it's going to take a little bit of finessing to get the staves, to get the caps pushed all the way into that stave slot. And by finesse, I mean it's going to take a little bit of brute force, I guess. But you're going to want to do your best to get the caps pushed into the slots on the staves. On some of the barrels fit better than the others. That's just how they turned out. Basically, we were in a tough position. We want obviously the barrel needs to be watertight, so there needs to be a very low tolerance. But also we wanted you to be able to get these barrels put together by hand without special tools, so we had to we didn't want to make them too tight. So as you'll see here in our fancy computer generated image, if you don't get the staves pushed all the way in tight with the barrel, you'll end up with gaps in between the staves, and obviously at that point you're going to end up with the barrel that's not watertight. So you need to try your best to get the staves pushed in as you're rolling the barrel together. And as I mentioned, this it's not going to be possible on all the barrels. And on this particular barrel that I'm putting together here, I was not able to get all of the staves pushed up flush against the end cap by hand, and I ended up with quite a big, at least maybe 3/32 or more of a gap in between my last stave there. So what I'm doing is I'm going to actually have to sort of use a bit more force and get these staves pushed in there. So what I did was I loosely applied the clamps to the barrels, right? And again, I did not tighten. I did not make them very tight because what you're going to want to do before you start slamming the staves against the barrel here is that you're going to need to make sure that they are perfectly lined up, as best possible at least, with the flat part of the cap. So the caps are not round, as you can see there, they're actually polygons. And if your stave is off to the side of off kilter, I guess, and it doesn't line up perfectly with the flat part of the end caps, as you can see here, you'll end up with a gap in between the staves. So what you need to do is sort of just manually push these over until they line up correctly. So we'll just do this here in this computer model, and as you can see, as you do that, you remove the gaps between the staves, and I will show you now how to do this with the actual barrel that I'm working on here. What I'm doing is I'm just lightly, some of them actually will move over pretty easily, though others you may actually need to push over with a screwdriver. So you could just wedge that in here, and I'm able to do most of these by hand, but here this very last one or two I actually had to just stick the screwdriver in there and torque, use a little bit of torque to get the stave moved over properly. But eventually I got to the staves to a point where they were all pretty well lined up with that end cap. And at this point you can now put a little bit of torque on that clamp and sort of snug the staves up. You're not going to be able to push them all the way in by just tightening the clamp. In fact, if you do that, you'd probably break the clamp before you got the staves all the way snugged up against the barrel. What you'll need to do is tighten the clamp and then just tap them lightly with a blunt object at the end of the screwdriver. It works perfectly fine for this, and you'll be able to get them to snug up against the end the cap there. So basically you'll just make a pass with a screwdriver, tighten it up, make a pass with a screwdriver, tighten the clamp up, and eventually you'll get that you'll get it tightened up to the point where there aren't any gaps, and then you'll just move on to the next side, and you'll repeat the process exactly the same way as you did on the first side. On this particular barrel here, I got the cap on the other side lined up much better with the staves, so I didn't have to move those staves around. So now I've got a barrel that's with all the staves snugged up against the caps here. However, the clamps aren't where I want them. In our testing, we've determined that they work the best if they're about a half an inch, at the outer edge of the clamp is about a half an inch away from the outer edge of the barrel. So what I'm doing is I'm just loosening the clamp up. Don't worry, the staves are not going to pop off at this point. I'm loosening the clamp up. I've slid it out a little bit. I'm going to loosen the other clamp up. I'm going to slide it out a little bit. And now I have the clamps positioned where I want them. However, I want to make sure that the barrel is absolutely as tightly sealed together as it can possibly be before I pour some water in this and try and hydrate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a couple more passes around the barrel, tapping on the staves, getting them to line up as snugly as possible with the end caps. I'll tighten the clamps in between, and basically you just repeat this as many times as possible. I guess as many times as necessary. You'll know when it's no longer necessary because the clamps are just not going to tighten anymore. And as you'll see here, I'm just using a screwdriver. I would highly recommend that you use a screwdriver as well. Don't try to use a drill or even a ratchet or anything like that. You can over tighten these clamps and bend the clamps, and that's going to be no bueno. So at the end of the process, this is what your barrel is going to look like. The next step is hydration. To view that video, visit the website listed on the bottom of this slide. I am Kyle Brown with Clawhammer Supply. Thank you for watching.